I'm so glad you could join us today to hear Rebecca Esselman, Executive Director of the Huron River Watershed Council, talk to us about the importance of Michigan's watersheds. In southeast Michigan, the Huron River Watershed spans a land area of more than 900 square miles, draining water to the Huron River through hundreds of tributaries, creeks, and streams. It spans Oakland, Livingston, Ingham, Jackson, Washtenaw, Wayne, and Monroe Counties, including 6 local League of Women Voter chapters. I'm Sandra Sorini Elser, the chair of the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw Advocacy Committee and leader of this League's statewide environmental network. And I know some of you are joining from outside of the Southeast Michigan area. And what Rebecca's going to talk about are things that are important to all watersheds in Michigan. I wanted to point out that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, including the importance of our natural resources, including our watersheds, and how they protect our environment and our planet. So again, I'm pleased to introduce Rebecca Esselman, Executive Director of the Huron River Watershed Council, and she's going to talk to us about the importance of the watershed. After Rebecca's presentation, we'll have time for some questions and answers. So if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat, and we'll ask Rebecca to answer them at the end. So as a reminder, we're recording this presentation. Okay, and we'll send everybody who registered the YouTube video of the presentation along with the PowerPoint and a few resources from the Watershed Council. So I'm very pleased to turn the program over to Rebecca Esselman.
Sandra, good morning, everyone. As Sandra mentioned, I'm Rebecca Esselman. I'm the Executive Director at the Huron River Watershed Council. And I'm going to share a little bit about freshwater protection, particularly inland waters, as opposed to our Great Lakes, which we tend to hear more about in Michigan. And I can do that through the lens of a watershed I know really well, which is the Huron River Watershed. But you'll see that a lot of what I talk about is applicable across inland waterways throughout the state. A lot of the threats to our freshwater systems and the solutions we deploy to address them are really, Michigan wide. So I'll take you on this journey with the Huron, but you'll see how it applies across the state. So just to orient you a little bit to our spot on the map, this is the Huron River Watershed. As Sandra mentioned, we're in southeast Michigan. A lot of Oakland County, Livingston, Washtenaw, a little bit of Wayne, and a few other counties. And we drain around 900 square miles of land area into the watershed, and the watershed is home to about 650,000 people. Beyond the county level, we have 68 local governments, cities, villages, and townships that have area in the watershed, and the Watershed Council works with those local governments on watershed protection. We empty into Lake Erie, south of Detroit, so that's an important factor in our work as well. And we love this river. When you think of a Michigander, you think of water. So many of us identify with freshwater, with the Great Lakes, with our lakes and streams. I was born and raised here, and I'm no exception to that rule. I'm sure that it's part of what led me to a career in freshwater protection. But these systems house the plant and animal life that we love. There's over 90 species of fish in the Huron, 34 species of reptiles and amphibians that rely on the river. We have many state and federal protected species that call the Huron River home. We have a unique status as the country's only catch and release smallmouth bass fishery. That's actually on a river, so it's really great fishing in the Huron. We see rod and reel and fly fishers alike, accessing the river all year round. And of course, it's respite, it's relaxation, it's recreation for Southeast Michigan residents. And something else unique about the Huron is that it is a drinking water source. So most Michiganders get their drinking water either from groundwater through wells or from the Great Lakes themselves. But the city of Ann Arbor gets about 85% of its drinking water from the Huron River. So it makes it even more important that we keep that water clean and high quality. It also drains to Lake Erie, which is the drinking water for 11 million people. So we play a role in keeping Lake Erie high quality as well. The river today is not what the river was. The Huron River is, and most Southeast Michigan rivers are about 10,000 years old. But as we developed this part of the country, most of our rivers became working rivers when they were in highly developed areas like Southeast Michigan. So, we have a working river legacy. A lot of industry was sited along the river. A lot of dams were placed on the river to support that industry. And unfortunately, the river was also used as a dumping ground for waste. So you pour your wastewater into the river and it disappears, right? Well, of course, we know it doesn't disappear, but that was kind of the paradigm for a long time in our history. Since awareness is raised around water pollution and the importance of water quality in the 60s and 70s, we've come a long way, but of course, there's still a lot of work to do. So I'll spend a little bit of time characterizing what are kind of the big threats that I see to the Huron River, to rivers in Michigan, and to our freshwater ecosystems. The first is nutrient and sediment pollution. Nutrients in small amounts in river ecosystems are essential, but in high amounts they become a pollutant. They can fuel algal blooms, including harmful algal blooms. And we see that increasingly in our watershed, especially in our impoundments like Ford and Belleville Lake, but also at some of our recreational beaches. We also, sediment can be a pollutant. So as water runs off the landscape, if it's not anchored by forests and grasslands, but is instead, built areas, we tend to get a lot of erosion that delivers sediment to the river, and that is a pollutant as well. Harms wildlife and it affects our recreation. Then there's E. coli and other pathogens. E. coli is a bacteria. You may have heard about this as a pollutant. E. coli is actually a contaminant that exceeds public health thresholds in most rivers throughout the state of Michigan. So this is a problem almost everywhere. The big sources of E. coli include failing septic systems, and then also pet waste is actually a pretty significant contributor to our bacterial contamination problems in our lakes and streams. We also spend a lot of time thinking about synthetic chemicals like PFAS and microplastics. PFAS, this is a really high profile one in the state of Michigan. We have the dubious honor of being ground zero for a lot of the learning around how pervasive PFAS are in our soil and water, the human health impacts that come from exposure. But we've also been in the position where we're somewhat of the leading edge on acting on PFAS. So we have drinking water and wastewater standards that came online far ahead of federal ones. And of course, right now we're seeing rollbacks of a lot of our federal PFAS standards, which is really unfortunate. So it's back to the state to really protect Michiganders on this issue. We have, in the Huron, we were one of the earliest known significant contamination sites. We had a manufacturing facility discharging huge amounts of PFAS into the Huron River about 2/3 of the way up for a considerable amount of time. This was in 2018. And as a result, the fish throughout the Huron River are contaminated with PFAS, and we have a do not eat fish advisory for the entire river. It's a really sad story. That people have eaten. I grew up eating panfish from the Huron River that I would catch with my grandparents, and this is something the kids of my generation grew up doing. There's also people in our communities that rely on fish as a protein source to supplement what they are able to buy, and they can no longer do that, or they have the unfortunate decision to choose between food now and the potential health impacts of taking on the burden of these contaminants. So it's a pretty sad story, and it's one that's made the Huron River Watershed Council really active in education and advocacy on PFAS. So you'll hear a little bit more about that later in the presentation. Huron also has one of the highest levels of microplastics in a study of 29 rivers in the Great Lakes region. So we know microplastics are making it into our waterways, and we're just starting, we being scientists, the collective community, are just starting to scope the problem and understand the impacts. But most of our rivers and streams will have some level of microplastics. And we are paying attention to this pollutant to see what we need to do to understand the problem and what the solutions are. Another threat we think about is, funny enough, rainfall. Rainfall is, of course, natural and critical part of a river system, but we are seeing changes in how much water travels through our waterways, and this is for two reasons. One, as we develop our landscape, we change the way water moves to our river. And when we change what we call the hydrology of the river, we have impacts to the wildlife and to the ecosystem itself. And then, of course, the other confounding factor is climate change. In Southeast Michigan, average annual temperatures have increased. Average annual precipitation has increased. And then the really big problem one is that third arrow there. We're experiencing stronger storms. And what that means is higher volumes of rain are falling in shorter periods of time. So if you mix that with development, you're really messing with the flow of water through a river system in ways that are detrimental. So I'll share a little bit about habitat loss too. So I talked about development and adding pavement to a watershed, causing problems with flooding and hydrology. But here I can illustrate the issue with a couple of maps. So this is the land use of the Huron River in 1800, and this is when the landscape was natural. It was forested, it was savannas, it was wetlands. This is what land use looked like as of 2010, and you see we've added considerable amounts of agriculture and urban and residential areas. The more we do that, the more we affect our ecosystems. So this is the way the two look side by side, and you can see considerable change. And of course, we are 15 years past 2010, and development continues to march west and north of Metro Detroit. So the red areas are getting redder, and we're continuing to lose valuable watershed natural areas. And what that does is so I can walk you a little bit through the water cycle and how that changes when we start development. When you have natural landscape, rainfall hits the forests and the soil, and it's soaked up into the soil, infiltrates down through the ground into the groundwater. There's a whole lot of pollutant cleaning and cooling that goes on in that process, and then it's delivered slowly to the stream channel, and only a little bit of it runs off the surface of the land and directly into the river. In a developed area where you have high imperviousness, and that's where water can't infiltrate, so that's rooftops, parking lots, sidewalks, driveways, roadways, that rain hits the pavement instead of the soil, and much more water gets delivered directly to the river overland. We get less groundwater recharge, and we get more runoff. And runoff carries pollutants like sediment, nutrients, and then things that, the dirty stuff on our streets and parking lots like motor oil and other contaminants. So that delivers pollutants, and it delivers water quickly to the river and causes erosion, impacts wildlife, and is pretty consequential for the health of the system. And then the other threat that I want to name is that everyone deserves a healthy environment and healthy river, and not all communities experience the same level of impact. There's disproportionate impacts of climate change and degraded water quality in our watershed. And you can see here, this is our watershed boundary laid over Michigan EJ screen, EJ being environmental justice. And the redder the community, the more vulnerable and impacted those communities are to poor environmental quality. And some of this is water, also air, soil, temperature, those kind of things. So we really look at our work through this lens and make sure that we are addressing this inequity. Okay, so how do we do this? This is the fun part. So we do a lot of studying of the river, just trying to understand what the problems are. This is mostly our monitoring programs. We do protection, so let's protect the remaining natural areas that we have. Let's protect water quality. Restoration, as I mentioned, the river has a pretty sordid history and a lot to recover from, and sometimes that involves direct restoration. It might be restoring fish habitat, it might be removing dams, it might be restoring sinuosity to a channel that is to a stream that's been channelized, sort of that direct restoration work. And then we do a lot around connecting, which is what I'm doing with you all today, is teaching people about the river, watersheds, how our actions impact it, and really try to create an army of people that are aware of the issues and the solutions. We have a very robust and fun scientific data collection and monitoring program. We have like 30 years of data, and this is like our pulse check. This is like going to the doctor for your annual physical. We can see where interventions we're doing have actually led to improvements in our indicators. We can see where we might be losing ground, and then we start looking at, why are we seeing our insect population become less diverse? And we can start looking for where the problems are. So this is really guides our work and makes sure that we're being strategic in our investments. We sample bugs. These are a good indicator of water quality, and we do this 3 times a year, and it's actually a really great engagement program too, because we use volunteers, a very large number of volunteers, and it's a great family-friendly activity, so it gets kids exposure to this kind of thing too, which I really like about the program. We also monitor chemistry and flow, another volunteer-run program. And we look at our remaining natural areas. where we have high quality natural areas, we really like to see them protected. The river is only as healthy as the lands around it. This is where I can give a nod to Sandra too, who works in our watershed, and others to protect key natural lands and agricultural landscapes in a way that helps us maintain these important workhorses for environmental quality. And then area of work that might be of particular interest to this audience, we're engaging more and more in policy and advocacy. I know that there's things that we can't do to achieve our mission unless there's change at the state level, in particular, federal as well. And then there's actually a lot of actions that local governments, like cities, villages, and townships can take that can either protect or harm our water resources. So we work at all those scales, the local, the state, and the national level, trying to get them to enact river-friendly policies. And as I mentioned, we have like 68 local governments. We try to provide them resources when they're interested in protecting their wetlands, lakes, and streams. So there's a couple on the screen here. We have a conservation millage toolkit that advocates will use to get a millage on the ballot and get that adopted so that there's dollars available at the local level for land protection, for example. We have a guide called the Land Use for Healthy Watersheds, which has a lot of sample ordinances and lets local governments know how through zoning, master planning, and ordinance adoption, they can protect their water resources. And then, we go up to to Lansing and provide testimony on bills that are either helpful or harmful to our freshwater resources, and occasionally we'll head to DC to do the same thing. I just want to share with you what our policy priorities are for 2025, just to give you an understanding of where we invest. So our state level policy priorities currently, first one is contaminant prevention and cleanup. I told you the PFAS story, microplastics. We had a scare with hexavalent chromium a number of years ago. It's all sorts of noxious chemicals we use in industry and manufacturing and agriculture that if we don't have strong regulation, we really are sitting ducks for pretty catastrophic events. So this is a policy priority for us. Stormwater utilities. This is an action the state can take that creates the enabling conditions for local governments to establish water utilities that bring money to do water infrastructure upgrades. So things like wastewater and stormwater. That infrastructure is getting old, it's failing, it's undersized because of the rainfall we're getting because of climate change, and we need money to make those investments to keep the public safe and our ecosystems healthy. So that's a priority. I mentioned septic systems. Michigan has the dubious honor of being the only state in the country that does not have a statewide septics code. We got really close to establishing a code in the last legislature, and it died in lame duck, along with a lot of other pro-environmental bills, which was pretty sad. But we need to keep after this one. Our septic tanks are these, there's so many of us on septics for our wastewater, and they are a buried and forgotten about piece of our infrastructure, and there's no rules governing how often they need to be inspected, what maintenance requirements are, what repair requirements are, and when they fail, they leach nutrients and bacteria into our waterways. So they are a significant problem. We're always working toward encouraging more land protection in our state. Dam removal is a priority. And then we're targeting the Water Resource Improvement Authority, which is kind of a wonky piece of legislation, but it is a mechanism by which local kind of lake associations and local governments can access funding for freshwater protection. At the federal level, because we're a small organization, we don't weigh in real heavy at the federal level, but the two critical pieces of the puzzle that we advocate for at the federal level is the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is a really significant amount of money that comes to our region every year to kind of restore the Great Lakes themselves and the inland waterways that feed to them. And then the Clean Water Act, of course, ever since that, it's a seminal act. It is the reason why our waterways are so much healthier than they were in the 60s and early 70s. And it is, we have to consistently defend the strength of the Clean Water Act. Various administrations at various times come in and try to soften what we've been able to accomplish with that act. And so it requires vigilance and constant defense to make sure that stays intact. Let's see how we doing on time here. I'm going to scroll through this stuff pretty quickly here so we can get to some good question and answer. I mentioned direct habitat restoration. This is a dam removal project in Dexter that we did that created a really great public space on Mill Creek, one of our major tributaries. We invest a lot in green stormwater infrastructure, which is a technical term, but you guys might know it as rain gardens. And similar kind of using nature to clean water in our urban environments. And this is a great tool for areas like Southeast Michigan because it gives homeowners something very tangible they can do to have an impact. We've actually joined forces with our sister watersheds at the Clinton, the Rouge, and the Detroit River to really try to accelerate the installation and adoption of green stormwater infrastructure in Southeast Michigan because it is such a potent strategy to keeping water quality high in urban environments and also reducing the flood risk that we are experiencing because of the larger storms and climate change. And then we do a whole lot with education and outreach. I mentioned our engagement through our volunteer programs. We do STEM education with K through 12, so we reach over 1,500 students each year and give them real hands-on experience with river ecology, biology, chemistry, hydrology, all that fun stuff. We produce a lot of public education materials, teaching individuals, homeowners, residents what they can do to improve water quality. And then we get out in our communities and get to know people, introduce ourselves, answer their questions about water, and educate them on water-related issues. We also manage a water trail. There are a good number of state-designated water trails in the state of Michigan. The Huron's one of them. We also have a national water trail designation. It's a heavily paddled river. More than 125,000 people either paddle, fish, or swim in the Huron every year. I think because it's a pretty high-quality river in a highly populated part of the state, we get a lot of recreation traffic, which is a mixed bag. It's really great because people value the resource, but we deal with trash and noise and some other issues from high use. So the main thing I want to highlight for you all in what you can do is focusing on our policy work. You all know to vote. That's a no-brainer, right? Talk to your friends and family about the issues and consider running for office. There is really significant amount of impact you can have as a planning commissioner, as a township board member. You don't have to shoot for the moon here, but a lot of decisions are made at the local level that have real impact for our environment. We have a Change Makers program, which trains people on how to be advocates with their local government in particular. Some of these people go on to become either elected or appointed officials, like I just mentioned, but some just learn how to talk about water with their community. We teach people what to ask for. What kind of ordinances should you ask of your city council? Things along those lines, so that you can go and provide public comment and provide the pressure they need to enact the solutions. So I think there's a link that's going to be dropped into the chat for you to access to learn a little bit more about our Change Makers program if you want to get involved in that. I think we have a workshop coming up in June. We also circulate a lot of like how to do something at home. I'm going to cruise through these quickly, but I want to share them because I feel like at this moment, if the environment is a priority issue to you, things can feel really defeating. The current federal administration is stripping us of our agency partners, of our funding, and rolling back a lot of the regulations and legislation that protects our natural resources. So in an environment that can feel powerless, there's a few things that you can do that we do have control over. Plant with natives in your yard. They are workhorses for clean water. I mentioned rain gardens. These are pretty easy to install, are really lovely, and have significant impact. Clean up after your pets. Pet waste is a big source of bacteria contamination to our river. Make sure you're disposing of household toxics appropriately and use simple cleaning products, natural cleaning products when you can. Chloride is becoming a significant contaminant in our waterways, and this is because of road salt. And of course, we don't want to stop salting our roadways. It's important for safety, but there are ways that you can reduce salt application that actually benefits water quality. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't encourage you to volunteer or donate to your local watershed councils or river groups. So we're all doing this work day in and day out. We all have very similar missions, and we need the resources to do that, and that's person hours and it's dollars. So I've listed just a few of the larger river groups in Michigan, but you can Google in your area and see what the active river group is. Friends of the Rouge, Detroit River, the Clinton River Watershed Council are here in Southeast Michigan. We've got Tip of the Mitt and the Watershed Center, and Huron Pines in Northern Lower. Kalamazoo over on the west side of the state, and the Superior Watershed Partnership and Land Conservancies up in the UP. They're all really great organizations that could use your support. All right, I will stop there and let us transition to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. This is very wonderful. Carolyn Green, who is a member of the Washtenaw League of Women Voters, is going to pitch some questions for you from the chat. And if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we could see everybody.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank you for such gorgeous slides. They were so engaging and simple to read. Thank you. So we had a couple of questions about PFAS. What can we do to clean them up, eliminate them, and limit microplastics as well?
Okay, yeah. So PFAS at the state level, your voice on what we're calling the polluter pay bills, calling your state elected officials and telling them that this is important to you, that you want polluter pay or polluter accountability laws to be considered and adopted is going to be our first defense. We used to have that in Michigan, and we lost it, and we've got to get it back. It's a really critical piece of legislation that has been gaining some momentum, and we just have to keep pushing. At the federal level, we really need to work with Department of Defense. A big source of PFAS is military applications. So it's in firefighting foam. Wordsmith Air Force Base is one of the other really contaminated sites in Michigan, and it's because of that firefighting foam. So pressure on the federal government to phase out PFAS in firefighting foam is critical. And then the other thing that I see gaining traction is really trying to reduce PFAS in consumer products. And we can do that a little bit at the state level. So lifting that up with your lawmakers is a good thing as well. And just for your own personal health, do a little homework on where PFAS is found in consumer products and really try to avoid it. It's pretty awful stuff. Microplastics, we're still, like I said, scoping that problem. But one thing we've been encouraging in the Huron River Watershed, a big source of microplastics are like our favorite fleece jackets. Okay, so through laundry, fleece is actually plastic. We get those fibers, and those fibers move through our laundry system and end up in our wastewater and get discharged directly to the river. There are filters that are relatively affordable that you can apply to your wash machine that filters out a lot of that. And that is something that you could do immediately at the household level that would reduce the pollution from microplastics.
Wow, thanks. That's encouraging to have a list of to-dos that we can do. I'm a little sad about the fleece, though. We have a question about the zoning ordinance. Could you explain a little more about zoning ordinances, maybe give some examples, maybe some resources around ordinances and water quality?
Yeah, so I encourage you to check out Land Use for a Healthy Watershed, which is a resource available. I think it should be on that Changemakers page that was circulated in the chat. If you scroll down to the bottom, we're actually in the process of revising that, but there's a lot of really relevant stuff in the current version. We really encourage density over sprawl, like top line stuff. You know, the more densely we can develop as opposed to sprawling, it actually that is a water protection and terrestrial ecosystem protection strategy. But on the ordinance, at the ordinance level, there are wetland ordinances, there are riparian and wetland setback ordinances that can be put in place that limit development around water bodies. So even 100 feet of forest between, somebody's garage and the waterway or somebody's lawn and a waterway provides a really good filter. So having riparian and wetland setbacks are a really good action local governments can take. Wetlands protection, we have wetlands protections at the state level and in the Clean Water Act, but it's 5 acres and above. And there's a lot of wetlands that are smaller than that, that we could just lose if we're unaware of them and we're not thinking about it. So at the local level, we can have more strict restrictions on development with wetlands. So those are a couple of examples.
Thank you. And then we had a specific question about an example of a parking lot that's draining with storm drains directly into, in this case, Lake Superior. But those sound like those would be helpful resources. Any more you would add to mitigate that kind of situation where someone sees a direct runoff?
Yeah, so this is where something like a rain garden could come into play. So, you can design parking lots to feed that runoff into a rain garden rather than a pipe that goes directly to the lake. And that runoff during a rain event captures in this indentation with the native plants. It can be held there for a while. It allows for infiltration. It captures the sediment, the pollutants, and then it moves slowly into the river. So there's site level actions you can take when there's a particular problem like that, that the use of things like rain gardens and bioswales are particularly effective.
Thank you. And a somewhat timely question. Does the Huron Watershed Council receive federal funding, and what has the impact been of, current things?
Yeah. I'd say the primary impact is uncertainty so far. We do receive some federal funding. We have about 25 to 30% of our total budget is federal funding currently. It's a little bit high right now because the Biden administration's bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act had a huge amount of money going to infrastructure, including water infrastructure. So we were getting a lot more access to federal funding that we really needed. So some of the impact, I feel like, is losing the wind that was in our sails from those funding sources. Now, you know, so much of this is, you know, there's the difference between what we're hearing and what's actually happening. So we're doing a lot of waiting and seeing on this. You know, we heard early on in the Trump administration that the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, were going to be kind of closed up, and the granting opportunities that were established through those would no longer be. I have since seen a couple of requests for proposals with BIL money. So, you know, there's a whole lot of uncertainty about our ability to access these funds, what's going to remain, what's going to dry up. The federal money that we have currently, while initially we were concerned that it might be pulled, it seems like the stuff that's under contract, which our grants were, we still are able to access those funds. So it is uncertain, and we're just kind of taking one day at a time, but also kind of mourning the loss of what felt like some pretty good momentum in the water space that was established in the last administration.
Wish I had a magic wand. I know that must be so difficult. We had a question about new development. So are there things local governments can do when there's new development to compensate for the impermeable surfaces, such as retention basins?
Yeah, so there's some counties in the state that are leading the way on establishing higher standards for stormwater with new developments and redevelopments. You know, I know my watershed best, and in Washtenaw County revised their stormwater rules a handful of years ago, and they have a good example of they've done a few things. There's earlier site review for new developments with that stormwater lens. There's higher requirements for detention and retention. They incentivize the use of natural solutions over just sort of your typical catch basin. And I believe they built in kind of a margin of safety to accommodate a changing climate, right? So whenever we build infrastructure, if we build it for this snapshot in time or based on rainfall data from decades ago, which is, you know, engineers lean on these resources that were established a while ago to have design specs for things like parking lots and stormwater runoff. It's not anticipating larger future rainfall, and we really need to build for our future environment, not our historic one, knowing that it's changing pretty significantly. So they built in a margin of safety so that there's just a little extra cushion in there to accommodate the larger events. So take a look at what Washtenaw County did with their stormwater standards for an example of that.
Hooray! That's nice. Something positive. A similar topic for the septic tank systems. If things aren't moving at the state level, can local governments do anything about septic tank regulations?
Yeah, so there's a handful of counties in the state that have a time of sale ordinance. Washtenaw County is our county in the Huron that has that. Whenever somebody sells their home and it has a septic system, an inspection is required as part of that transaction. So at least at one point in time, they've got to have that septic system inspected, and then of course, you know, during the transaction, it's decided whether the seller pays for it or the buyer, or how they're going to address it. But we, you know, with a point of sale ordinance, you get your eyes on those septic systems more than in the absence of a state code and the absence of a point of sale ordinance. It's something that's a little bit of a heavy lift with real estate agents tend to oppose this under the argument that it could derail a sale, but I really don't think, that's a significant outcome of these septic systems and septic system inspections. So that's a local route that you can take that helps address the septics issue.
Thank you. And one last question that I'm aware of. Could you speak a little bit more about the stormwater utilities? Maybe another example of a success story. I think we all need that. And maybe some ongoing efforts.
Yeah. So, stormwater utility does function like any other. We pay our water bill. We pay our wastewater bill, our trash pickup. And that money goes to, in like the drinking water case, to treatment and distribution of drinking water. So there's a pot of money designated to doing that well. The stormwater utility functions similarly, where dollars are collected and then utilized to maintain the system. And so it's pretty straightforward, and we do it for a bunch of other infrastructure needs, but there were some legal cases that really scared municipalities away from establishing stormwater utilities out of fear of being sued. There is a debate about whether the assessment is a fee or a tax, and you can't do a tax without a ballot approval, right? We argue it's a fee. And, City of Ann Arbor has a stormwater utility and has actually been sued a few times and successfully defended the fact that it is a fee and has been able to maintain their stormwater utility. And therefore they have a unique source of funding to keep our stormwater system functioning better than we would otherwise. So what the state can do is kind of really clarify that these utilities are a fee and that it is a legal way of establishing critical funding for maintaining a city's infrastructure. So that's a little bit more about that one.
Right, and also you want to not have flooding in your basement. You don't want your roads to flood, right? And so very important to have enough money to make sure your stormwater works.
Yes, and that's a good point. I think people don't understand stormwater systems so much and kind of the value they provide. And so, nobody wants to pay an extra bill, especially if they don't see how it kind of protects them and the things they value. So I think there's some education that needs to happen too, to get the buy-in from the voting public to not resist something like a new bill for the maintenance of our stormwater systems.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca and Carolyn. We have 1 or 2 minutes, so if anyone else has a question, you can raise your hand and we can try it that way. Otherwise, Carolyn put the resource links in the chat. And again, as I mentioned, we will send the YouTube video of this presentation along with, if Rebecca gives us permission, a copy of her PowerPoint in PDF, as well as the links to resources. So looks like we learned a lot in a short period of time. So I'm going to say that thank you, and also thank you to Allison, our Zoom tech, who is making sure we're doing everything right here. And again, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time to educate us all.
And it's my pleasure. Thank you for your interest in the topic, and thanks for the invitation to present.
Yeah, right. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, you all as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.